a little bit about my background. So I did my undergraduate degree in a college called AC Tech. It's in southern India. It is a government college, and I decided to select that particular college because A, it's government college, the fees is low, it's very affordable, and apparently the mechanical engineering program was good, and that's kind of the reason why I chose it. And in college, I really liked key subjects like thermodynamics and fluid mechanics. They were very interesting to me, and I also did very well in the practical labs. Again, in India, there is not a lot of scope for you to go and run your own experiments in labs, right? Most colleges don't allow you to do that. But I at least stayed back, learned as much as I could about them, and then I think when I was in my second year, I saw a few MTech guys performing some type of simulation in ANSYS Fluent, and they had a lot of colorful images. And I think that was my first encounter with computational fluid dynamics. That it seemed very interesting, but I really didn't know much. And actually, my primary interest was, like I said, thermodynamics and fluid mechanics, and I really wanted to learn about IC engines. And that was actually my original interest, and I never really cared much for CFD, even though that particular image that I looked at in my second year was very cool. So what ended up happening was when I decided to pursue my masters, right, based on conversations that I had with some friends. Right from my second year, I started researching universities. So thinking backwards, I think I kind of made a good call. So because the process took a while for me, so I ended up researching a lot of universities right from my second year, and then I actually found one of my seniors who was studying at the University of Wisconsin Madison. I emailed them, had a conversation with them, and that's kind of how I understood how IC engines are designed using computers and how CFD is an integral part, right? So that's kind of how this all started. I learned that CFD is used for simulating IC engines somewhere between second year and third year. And then I decided that since my interest is in IC engines, it would be really cool to learn how to simulate it. And I ended up following University of Wisconsin Madison right from my third year. With the help of the senior, I was also able to successfully get an admit there. And once I went to UW, I was able to take up a formal education in CFD and combustion, and that's kind of how this all started.
Hey, Sarang, the Surya here from Skilling Gospel. So, great. So, one thing that I also wanted to kind of understand from you is, what you mentioned was about thermodynamics, heat transfer, fluid mechanics being one of your area of interest, and also IC engines, and that kind of propelled your interest towards, say, computational fluid dynamics at the end. So, would you kind of categorize anyone with an interest in fluid mechanics, thermodynamics, heat transfer might be a very good candidate to kind of pursue computational fluid dynamics as a career. Like, say for example, if I'm an undergrad engineer in my second, third, and fourth year, and or if I'm graduated and I do not know what domain I need to choose. So how do you kind of take a look at my say probably transcripts and say, hey, okay, this might be your area of interest. So can you talk me through that?
Yeah, definitely, Surya. And I think that's a question that I think a lot of students experience on a day-to-day basis. And the problem is actually twofold. You don't know your real area of interest because you have not worked on, say, projects in that particular area, so you really cannot say if you actually like doing it or not. And the only way you know if you are actually good in that is through marks that you might have scored. So the best way to figure out if what the best way to figure out what your area of interest is very simple. If you are like me, if you graduated from a curriculum that focuses purely on exam, you in your heart you definitely know the courses that you really like learning, and the only reason you scored good marks is because you genuinely cared about the concepts in that particular course. Everyone knows that internally, right? And it's fine if you did not score a whole lot of marks. It's perfectly fine if you scored only 70% or 65%. It really doesn't matter. But if you felt like you really enjoyed learning that particular subject and you did your best and you were able to score decently or at least the best you can, that is a clear indicator of what your area of interest is. And for me, that was thermodynamics and fluid mechanics.
So once you say probably walking through your career, right? So you did your undergrad in AC Tech. You realized you wanted to kind of work on say fluid mechanics, IC engines, and thermodynamics. Then you applied for your masters, and how did kind of masters? What was your first impact while you did your masters? Like what was your first experience in masters? Do you think were you prepared, just knowing good amount of fundamentals in the subjects that we discussed, and what did you do to kind of get upskilled, and where did you go from your masters? So how was that journey?
So this is actually a funny story. When I was finishing up my final year, um, actually when I was in my seventh semester, I think that's when I took a subject called heat transfer. And for a whole bunch of problems, my undergraduate professor asked me to write C programs. So I wrote those C programs. I thought they are not going to be useful at all, and it was a complete waste of time. And because it did not help me get more marks in the subject. In fact, I wasted some time, and I could not really show those codes as part of project. But now I realize that that would have actually been a very good idea. And I even did not include those projects in my resume because I didn't know what to do at that point. I thought coding is not something computers coding is not something that mechanical engineers need, and I really did not put it. And when I went for my masters, one of the first courses that I took, and you also know it, is heat transfer. You took the same course later, and that was one course where there was unbelievably a large number of assignments. And I remember in the class that the professor of heat transfer, his name was Professor Gregory Nellis. He asked a lot of questions, and I always answered the questions, and I thought I was super smart. And until the first homework was given, the first homework assignment was so hard that I took enormous amount of time, literally cried when I finished it because it was so hard. But the reason why the reason why it was so hard was the entire assignment was at the end of the day a computer program. We had to do some heat transfer calculations. I don't know what the problem was, but it's essentially the same type of problem for which I had written a C code. And then my immediate realization was, if I had done this right from my first semester in my undergrad instead of waiting till the seventh semester to write the code, it would have been super useful. But yeah, masters was very hard. First semester was very hard, especially if you're academically very good in India. You'll find that it is still not enough, because you at the end of the day have to solve problems by applying what you have learned, and you have to apply them using some type of computer program, which is very, very hard.
So for people who are joining us, people who do not know, both Sarang and I did our masters at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Sarang was 1 year senior to me, and I clearly remember this particular coursework, heat transfer. So I went on to UW-Madison my first semester. Sarang was one of my roommates, and I asked what all courses to take. So heat transfer was one course. I think in my educational career, the most that I have learned is from that one single course, heat
I
transfer.
would agree as well. I mean, I would say that that's one of the courses where I also learned a lot.
Yeah, and the reason being, from day one, you basically had to apply what you learned. So I think the first week's assignment was with respect to resistance, building resistance networks, and uh, and I thought I could easily, like, I understood everything in class, and I thought I can do it very well until the first assignment kind of came. The first assignment happens in the first week, and kind of came and started doing it, and I thought I'll do it in 2 hours. It took me like literally 7 days to finish the whole assignment, right?
Yeah, I think I remember that as well. So the thing is, solving it in pen and paper is super easy, but when you have to code it, and if you've never done it before, it's very hard. You almost feel blank, and you don't know what to start with.
And this is one of the things that every engineer kind of starts happening, right? So you basically want to get into a core mechanical engineering domain, or you want to get into a master's degree. And once you we think that we know everything while we do our undergrad just based on GPA. Once we get into the real world, that's when we realize that whatever we learned theoretically, we did not learn how to apply it practically. And when I say practically, it's using a computational tool most of the times. And that realization is what kind of changed the way that we started looking at education as a whole. And that's what is needed, and that's why we basically build skilling. But that we can speak about it later as well. But Sarang, once you basically, so one of the things that I hear is, okay, in undergrad you understood a few fundamental courses, went on to do your masters, so you started learning coding. And how did it graduate from there?
The interesting thing is, it's just the it's just having the opportunity to do the code. And when I say code, one thing that I should be very clear and not confuse people is, see, when we all were in first semester, there would have been some type of programming course, correct? I think that's the type of code that is very easy. For example, I did mention that when I was in seventh semester, I could actually code, right? So those are fairly easy programs to write. But at the end of the day, if you take mechanical engineering problems, the way you solve them is by using some sophisticated methods at the end, right? We all learn concepts in linear algebra and differential calculus, right? So the thing that we always miss is, how do you actually use the techniques that you learn in linear algebra to solve mechanical engineering problems? That was a huge gap, correct? And that's why there was so much struggle in the first couple of semesters. But then once that gap was filled by taking appropriate courses, uh, things I could basically learn things faster, because at the end of the day the theoretical concepts were still sound. So I was able to use these skill sets to get a research opportunity under my advisor, right, at the Engine Research Center, where I was given opportunity to look at codes like OpenFOAM, uh, an engine simulator tool called Kiva, and another engine simulator tool called as ANSYS Forte, where I was given the opportunity to work with companies like General Motors and I think Argonne National Lab as well, to essentially simulate their engine designs using the software tools that I mentioned. And suddenly everything started falling in place. It was very interesting to see that the similar algorithms that we used to solve the fundamental heat transfer problems, were used at a much larger scale in these software programs. And once that connect was established, I think it was easy to see that this can definitely be an area where I would like to learn more. And I was able to then learn systematically, which kind of helped me finish my masters and also helped me get my first job.
And where did you end up going, Sarang?
Okay, so as I mentioned previously, I worked for a lab called as Engine Research Center at the University of Wisconsin Madison. So that lab was one of the best labs around the world when it comes to engine research, and there were a lot of really great professors doing a lot of work. And 10 to 15 years before I actually studied, there were like group of three smart guys, Eric, Keith, and Kelly, who actually graduated from the same lab. They essentially went through similar kinds of training, but at a much more advanced level, because they all have PhDs. And they started a company called Convergence Science, and they essentially built their own IC engine simulation software, right? So, and they were right there in Madison. So once I had completed my thesis, I just emailed them saying that this is what I did in the last, these are the types of projects that I did in the last couple of years. And a very interesting thing was, they just called me. I think they sent the email roughly on the start of the week. My interview was on Thursday, I remember that. And in just one day they gave an employment offer, because the projects that I did at while I was in UW Madison was exactly what they were looking for. That experience is exactly what they were looking for, and that's how I got my first job at Convergent Science.
Just to let you know, I've been speaking with, say, I did two AMS before this, like Sandesh and Subbu, and most of them basically have the kind of the same kind of experience that you mentioned. I see a pattern out here. The pattern is basically be good at fundamentals. So in your case, it's IC engine, thermodynamic, and heat transfer. Then try to apply the fundamentals using a particular tool, computing tool, and learn coding for CFD. So those things, and then start working on industry-oriented projects, right? So that, say, for how you worked it in your masters with Argonne or GM or Cummins, the ability to work on industry-oriented projects, uh, that, and then networking. So finally, showcasing your projects to the right people. Kind of, this is kind of a pattern that I have seen with successful people in a particular domain. Do you agree that's something that you have seen with few other folks as well?
So I completely agree. And if you think about it, you know, we also recently had a discussion with the person who mentioned that Stanford University was also found with the same principle, right? So for those of you who do not know the story, Stanford is located in the West Coast, right? And before Stanford was started, there were no good universities in the West Coast. Majority of the universities were in the East Coast, right? Like your MITs and stuff. And the founders of Stanford, the way they actually ended up starting the university was very mind blowing. This is several years ago, right? But it's actually an impressive thought process. They just hired people who would go to university, would go to industries and see what's happening, and they would create curriculum where students should essentially do industry relevant projects. And that is exactly how the Stanford of today started several years back. So yeah, I think it's a well established pattern, and it's been there for several years, Surya.
Yeah. I totally see what you say as well. Like, totally makes sense, right? Because that's how you learn industry-oriented skills. So that being said, the other thing that I also wanted to kind of understand is, you have now been in the domain of computational fluid dynamics probably for the last 11 years, and or decade, right? So if you are in your second year right now, right, and you want to get into, if you are given a chance to go back to your second year, and if you're given an option of doing things differently, and if that is now, what will you do, right? Or how will you approach a career in CFD?
See, I kind of see the short answer is to do the projects, Surya, right? But I think an easier answer is even after 11 years, I've completed 11 years, as you said, probably a bit more, including the academic experience. But let us say even 10 years. So with 10 years of experience, the thing that I feel envious about is when I look at the profiles of third year students. There is one student called Priyatosh. If you, I don't know if you have his profile, but if you
I
want to
have.
pull it up,
Yeah.
and in the meantime, so guys, as you know, obviously I'm one of the co-founders of Skilllink, right? But I look at a lot of student projects. I try to read them and I see what is it that they are doing, and I kind of see what is it that they're gaining out of the courses that we offer. And Priyatosh was one of the students, and I went through his profile, and that was the first time that I was so envious in like 11 years after completing. Yeah, this is the guy, Priyatosh. So I went through his projects. You know, I looked at the level of code and level of analysis that he had done, right? And when I look at it, right, I'm really envious about the opportunity that Priyatosh is getting. For me to learn these things, I had to enroll myself in a master's program. Luckily, I was funded. But say that I did not have any funding, right, Surya? I would have spent what, anywhere between 24 to 36 lakhs to essentially learn the same thing what Priyatosh had learned in say 3 to 6 months. if so, to answer your question, if there is a time machine, I would like to go back and do exactly what Priyatosh has done, because in the next 2 to 3 years, the amount of opportunity that this guy is going to get is going to be huge. And there is already a person who is kind of starting to follow that pattern. So, guys, this is again a long story. There was the first student that joined SkillLink. His name was Raj Dave. When we started at SkillLink, I was still back in US, and Raj Dave enrolled in the course. And the and Raj Dave's previous background was that he was trying out a lot of US universities. He was trying to look for job opportunities. I don't think he got any, and that's why he decided to take the course that we offered. So Raj Dave's career has been superb, right? So post the course, he was able to get a fully funded opportunity at Clemson, which covers his tuition fee. Essentially, he's getting paid to study. And not only that, and I don't think Surya, you know this. Recently, Raj Dave got an internship opportunity at Altair.
Oh, okay.
And Raj did not tell this to me. I was actually looking at Altair's website, Altair's LinkedIn post, and Raj Dave's photo was there. And that's essentially the snowball effect, or even a jump pad effect that these type of projects can offer. And the thing that I really wish is, if I had these projects on my profile when I was in my third year, the level of impact that I could have had when I contacted those professors, I think would have been tenfold. Because when I did my interview with my advisor Surya over the phone, I had one project,
Yeah.
and those projects are not even comparable to the most basic project that Priyatosh has done. So yeah, that's essentially what I would do if I have to do it all over again.
Totally
I would
makes
do
sense,
what
right?
this guy did.
Yeah, yeah. Guys, just to kind of give you an idea, you all have. So I'm assuming all of you are engineers and have gone through engineering college, right? And in engineering, what happens is we do not have the opportunity to work on industry oriented projects. To think about it, right? So say Raj has worked on these many projects, right? And say someone like Priyatosh, right? Priyatosh has worked on multiple projects, right? And if you basically think about it, how did what would be the impact someone will get because of these projects, right? Think about this. Say compare yourself with someone out here and think about the opportunities that kind of come up, and that's what we are envious of, right? So Sarang and I obviously talk a lot since we are running the company, and most of the times we basically say this is something that we should have had when we were studying engineering, because um, this is how you develop. So most of you might have heard companies asking for experience, right? So, and I've seen LinkedIn posts where they even kind of say, I'm a fresher, but the company is asking experience. How will I get a job? How will I get experience if I do not get a job? The company, think from the company's point of view. The company is going to invest, say, a yearly 4 to 5 lakhs on you for the next, say, 10 years if you're staying with the company, right? So from a company point of view, they are going to spend at least 20 to 25 lakhs on you for the next 5 years. Why should they basically take you? Right? That's the question that you need to answer. You need to convince them that you have experience in the domain that they want to uh, basically hire. And how do you do that if you do not get a work experience? If you do not get a recruiter? That's the kind of chicken and egg. Which comes first? Does work experience come first? Should I work to get work experience? Right? At the end of the day, if you think about it, they are just asking for exp- your subject matter experience in that particular subject on an industry project. So those things is what Priyatosh and people like Raj Dabe are doing while they are working on their projects in SkillLink, and then that's something super useful, I think. And going back to what Sarang basically said, uh, say both of us have a funded admit, right? So what does a funded admit mean? Funded admit is something that the college basically says you do not need to pay your tuition fee, right? So our tuition fee was around 30 lakhs for 4 semesters. They basically say you do not need to pay the tuition fee, and you basically work and also study parallelly. The work will be under a professor, and we will pay you $1,000 every month. $1,000 is like 60,000 rupees or 75,000 rupees right now. And think about that, right? So for example, Sarang and I spent anywhere between 4 to 5 lakhs, or Sarang spent probably lesser in his undergrad. So I spent around 2.5 lakhs for my engineering degree, right? So to finish my engineering degree, spent 2.5 lakhs, and to finish my masters in the US in a very reputed university, I spent lesser than that. Think about that, right? And that's the opportunities that we both got just by having one good project. And those projects were not even comparable with what the students right now have in skilling platform. And that's the kind of opportunities that are present for people who start working on projects. And if you're someone, so going back to my initial question of Sarang is, what will he do differently? I agree, right now, if I was in college in my second, third, or fourth year, or going to looking for a job, I will start working on projects to kind of develop a strong portfolio, right? So that's something that I'll basically do, right? Okay. So what's my next question? Give me 1 minute. I have written down questions, and also I'll basically summarize what we have seen till now, right? So I have this habit of taking notes. Um, so with Sarang's career, or say even in CFD, if you want, in undergrad, probably these are good subjects to be good at, and then probably learn coding. So do not learn coding from the computer science part of it. When we say coding, do not think, oh, coding is not for mechanical engineers, or all of those things. Coding is for everything. Coding is like a coding. So the easiest way that I will basically say is, if you coding is a tool. It's like playing cricket. You need a bat to play cricket, right? So that's it. You becoming a batsman, it depends upon what you learn, your fundamentals and all those things. But coding is basically your tool. And so it is, you need to learn it from the mechanical engineering part of it, and that's very easy, right? And
Surya,
then
so just to add to that example, I think, see, it's very important to, if you're actually learning coding the right way, that is how computer science students learn it, right? By learning the fundamentals of variables, memory, pointers, writing functions, and you learning a traditional programming language like C or C++ to start with is still the best approach. The problem is that that's going to be very hard for a mechanical engineer, because it's like, using the analogy that you said, it's essentially saying that, okay, go to the nets and practice first, practice hitting the ball straight for 500 times, 600 times before you can actually play the game. So for mechanical engineers, it's easy to just use code as a tool that you said, to kind of get a feel for it and become excited about it. But then at some point you have to still go back and learn the fundamentals, right? So that is when you can actually truly use the tool effectively.
no, totally. Again, that's great feedback, right? So, guys, if you want to kind of learn coding, kind of what Sarang said makes sense. So, the next question, Sarang, I wanted to kind of ask, is what are the different types of, say, for example, CFD itself has multiple domains on it, right? What would you say are the different subdomains of computational fluid dynamics? Like, where I am ideally leading to is, what are the different types of jobs that I can apply? I know that aerodynamics is there, HVAC is there. Like, what can you give us a few examples, and also talk about what are the applications of computational fluid dynamics, and where is it applied?
Sure. So, for those of you who are not familiar with CFD, computational fluid dynamics is essentially a technique that lets you simulate or lets you capture how fluid moves and how fluid interacts with different objects using a computer, right? So that's what computational fluid dynamics is. And oftentimes you can actually use CFD to study how flow flows and behaves in complex geometries, right, which you cannot typically see. An example would be something like an IC engine or a gas turbine. We all know how IC engine works. If you're an undergraduate student, you know that there are four strokes in an IC engine, correct? The problem is, how does the combustion actually take place? So when combustion takes place, there is something called as flame front, right, which is essentially the zone where the combustion takes place. And this zone actually propagates through the combustion chamber at a very high speed, which is essentially what you would call as the flame front traveling, and the speed with which it travels is what you would call as the flame speed, correct? Now, obviously, when you look at your motorbike from the outside, you cannot see or you cannot perceive this entire process because it happens so fast. But with computational fluid dynamics, what I can do is I can actually see how fast my flame is spreading. And then, not only that, I can actually see if my flame is being interacted, or the flame propagation is being interacted by some part within my AC engine, right? And if something is blocking the flame, again, blocking the flame is a very exaggerated scenario, but say that there is some part of your engine where the flame is getting quenched, then you can do some design modifications to make sure that the flame propagates correctly. And this directly affects what is called as combustion efficiency. And when you get very high combustion efficiency, which can be around 95 to 98%, it means that you're burning your fuel completely. And this is where, coming back to the theory concepts, we all know that burning your entire fuel is a very good thing from a thermal efficiency point of view, correct? But without using computational fluid dynamics, you have to rely upon costly experimental techniques that leverage the use of transparent combustion chambers to see what's happening inside an IC engine. So when I work during my research, uh, during my master's research, that's the project that I worked on with General Motors, where they had a transparent combustion chamber engine. But that experimental setup is super costly, as you can imagine, and each and every experiment is at least, you're spending at least 100k dollars on it. So right, so somewhere between 60 to 70 lakhs for one experiment. So an average student or an average engineer is not going to get access to that level of data. But with computational fluid dynamics, you can actually start using these tools and actually start solving these type of hard problems and gain insights, so that at the end of the day you develop that particular product. Now this is not only for IC engines. Think of airplanes, think of wings, right? So most of you might be associated with some type of student racing competition where you have to design a wing or whatever, right? And you can, if you know what you're doing, you can actually use computational fluid dynamics to get the required downforce from your wing. And you can understand what is the downforce that your vehicle generates at different angles of the wing and at different speeds. Having this knowledge helps you tune your race car for different racing circuits based upon, the available data, right? What is the wind speed, how far is the straight line track of the race. You can actually guess the downforce availability based on your CFD simulations, and you can do a great job of optimizing the vehicle's wing position to essentially win the race.
And these are all great things, right, Sarang? And where do people like, while you're saying this, sounds great, but is there a, where do, you were lucky that you were at UW Madison to kind of get access to all these things, right? Probably IC engine simulations or aerodynamics and whatnot. But how do like normal students basically get access to kind of work on simulations like this?
See, that is where, if you remember, that's one of the reasons why the initial set of courses that I made on our platform was related to these simulations. Correct. The reason why, I created a course on Converge is because I know how powerful of a tool it is, because companies like Red Bull use it, right? And the other problem is, when you're running these simulations, you need a lot of computational power, right? For example, when I did the course, I had a machine I think it had 16 cores. It was a Xeon processor, and I believe it had like 192 gigs of memory. And for some simulations, actually, that was not enough. And I had to approximate the simulation model. But the reason why I made that course first is essentially to show students that, hey, this is how an industry scale simulation looks like. And here's the interesting part. This statement is true irrespective of the type of engineering simulation that you want to perform. Now, I'm not saying that engineering simulation is the only engineering, right? But when it comes to projects, performing experiments is super costly. Like I said, the reason why you don't see a course that I've created on experimental analysis of IC engines is because we have to spend a minimum of 70 lakhs to create a single module of that course. To get realistic data, get a lab, get an experienced person who can handle the engine, it's impossible to get that level of data. But the closest thing that you can achieve is simulations, and that is the same thing in any area of engineering. Even if you're looking at strength analysis, if you're trying to figure out if a part can withstand a particular load, yes, you can put it in a testing machine and load it till it breaks. But again, that level of testing and sensing equipment is very, very costly, and you need physical parts to be able to test. Correct? The whole idea here is use simulation tools to kind of understand the problem statement, understand the product as much as you can, and put yourself in a position so that the industries are just going to pick you, right? Because the things that we discussed in the last 5 minutes, a majority of engineering students will not know this. And I see that you have pulled Shrey's profile.
Yeah, and
So
here
go
is
ahead,
some
go ahead.
like when you were speaking about it, right? Since I did not know about this, I just wanted to kind of go through our projects portfolio and see if somebody has worked on engines, and I kind of came across this particular project that Shreya has worked on, and it was very interesting. The level of detail report that a student basically works on, right? And this is not only kind of just explaining the explaining what he did in the tool, but also explaining the theory part of it, and also taking out the results and plotting. And these are like what you do in a fourth year, final year project, probably, right? And to kind of, I saw, was looking at how he was injecting spray particles for a port fuel injected engine, and how he was simulating the whole spray modeling. And here it was, he was looking into the temperature for the inside the combustion chamber, and how everything kind of changes. And while I was looking, one thing that I thought was the ability to kind of do what you did in your masters. uh, People don't need to do that kind of, don't need to spend say 20-25 lakhs anymore to kind of get that kind of a experience. And these are things that are not taught in college, obviously, right? Yeah, so this
See,
I think is
actually,
really really
that's
helpful
actually an
for
interesting
a
point,
student who
Surya.
wants to kind of go into say any particular domain. And this was I think another student, Nikit, probably, and he was looking into temperature variation. He was doing a piston bowl geometry analysis, I think, and where he kind of looks at emission reduction. And so these projects, the ability to kind of even do these projects, I think is pretty neat. And so I also saw something on aerodynamics, because when you said about Formula SAE, I wanted to see if our coursework had anything upon aerodynamics and how to do wind tunnel testing. And I find these things interesting, right? How so one thing that you said was these all need computational power. How do students who take skilling coursework on say CFD masters or an external aerodynamics masters kind of get this knowledge and kind of write these kind of detailed reports? Like I did my undergrad in India, and I have not seen even my class topper have these kind of projects in his portfolio. So curious to kind of understand that.
So the reason is very simple, right? So when you're trying to do these type of projects, you will actually see that this is not the first project the student works on. So it's
Mhm.
kind of like the same analogy that you would give for someone who is going to the gym. I'm not going to be doing deadlifts on the day one. I have to do my homework on maybe running a bit, building enough stamina to actually do some basic body weight exercises and then slowly build on those fundamentals. The reason why these students are able to do this is they started with fundamental problems where they, like I said, coded the math behind these solvers, right?
Okay.
So if you look at finite difference, fourth order approximation of second derivative, one project above, many students would not realize that you would need to understand what is there in this particular project, right? So if you don't understand what is there in this particular project, you will not be able to perform the FSAE scar simulation without understanding it. Meaning, you can see if you go today on YouTube, you will find some tutorial on how to perform an airflow simulation over a car. The whole point is some students think that that's the end of it. Uh, See, that's great to get some initial motivation, but if you think that's how engineering is being done in companies, you're completely wrong. And I actually saw one of the questions there that if I'm going to work in an OEM, do I need to have good basics in computational fluid dynamics? Absolutely, right? Because in OEMs, you're not being paid good money for clicking buttons. You're basically being paid for the model choices that you make, the accuracy with which you're capturing the physics of the problem, right? The simulation decisions that you take that helping achieving results in a fast and an efficient manner. So these are the things that you focus on, and that's why people hire you in OEMs, right? And without having the fundamentals nailed, there is no way for you to be able to get a job in these companies. And students like Imanshu, Priyatosh, or any of the other guys that you showed, it is very important to understand that the final project, yes, it looks really cool, it's very attractive, but they were able to do that very well and they were able to get jobs or internships is because they have also done this work that looks very boring, very mathematical, very theoretical, right? But they have actually understood this. No one is going to write so much without understanding it, right? And that's where the difference is, Surya. You have to be able to do these hard things, and a lot of people take shortcuts here. Some students, even if they enroll in our programs, if they're taking shortcuts here and if they're not putting the hard work here, they're not going to succeed, right?
Totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. Great. This is brilliant. So let me do one thing. I'll see if I have any more questions for you that I basically wanted to kind of ask. I think there is just one more question, Sarang, and then I'll basically go on to audience's questions. So you hear um, people saying, "Hey, 1D tool, 1D CFD tool, 2D CFD tool, 3D CFD tool." If you know 1D tool, probably you will be able to get. So, first of all, my question is, what is a 1D tool? What is a 2D tool? What is a 3D CFD tool? The second question is, uh, if I know a particular tool, is that enough? Should I also know the background? Say, for example, if I'm like brilliant at ANSYS script, right? I know to do 10 simulations that I've basically looked at YouTube and I've basically gone through everything and done the same kind of thing again and again. And I know that. I know a particular tool. Will that be enough? So, can you kind of talk through how about the different types of tools and also the
Sure.
tool knowledge versus theoretical knowledge.
Sure. And I think I can kind of talk about this in a very generic sense so that it does not apply to only computational fluid dynamics. See, any simulation software that you see, it could be a solid mechanics simulator tool, it could be a multi-body dynamics simulator tool, it could be a CFD simulator tool. At the end of the day, what all these tools do is they solve some type of a differential equations. Now, these differential equations are mathematical statements. For example, in mechanical engineering, we have all studied that mass is conserved, momentum is conserved, energy is conserved. Now, these are all English statements, right? These are all English statements. You can't do much with these English statements. But if you write these English statements in a mathematical equation, you call them as balance equations or also called as governing equations. So these equations essentially balance energy, they balance mass, they balance momentum, right? So there is some quantity that they are trying to preserve, and you write an equation for it. Now, 95 to 98% of the time, these equations are differential equations. And for complex problems, there is a very good chance that these are partial differential equations. Now, solving these partial differential equations using computers is what simulations is all about. Now, if you're taking ANSYS structural analysis, it solves the differential equations for structures. Now, the differential equation might have a different form. Sometimes it uses an integral form. Sometimes it uses something called as a weighted residual approach, which is again, you have the same equation, you just write it in a different form. So if you take these differential equations, you can solve them, and there are several methods. Now, solving differential equations, there are three primary methods, which are called as finite difference methods, finite element method, and finite volume method. Now, typically, for solving fluid flow problems, FEM, finite volume method is used. For solving structural problems, you typically use finite element analysis. You can use finite volume to solve structural problems as well. There's no problem with it. And then finally, you have finite difference method, which can again be used for any applications. So at the end of the day, your simulation tools like ANSYS Fluent. Surya, am I still audible?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So simulation tools like ANSYS Fluent, ANSYS Workbench, they are all solving mathematical equations at the end of the day. And understanding this basic, right? Think about this. I never used the name of a single software tool here, right? Because at the end of the day, all the software tools solve the same equations. The way they solve it, the approach that they take in the solution procedure might be a bit different, but they all solve the same equations. So if you actually learn what those equations are, and if you learn how to solve them, you become a generalist. Then the tool is essentially something that you can learn very easily. But if you try it the other way around, you will watch YouTube videos, you will complete 1-2 simulations. And the moment you go to the industry and they ask you a fundamental question saying that, hey, it seems like you have done a lot of projects, you have colorful reports, can you tell me what is the equation you solved? The student goes blank, and they have essentially blown away the interview opportunity. So it is very, very important to always learn the fundamentals, the basics, and then you should proceed to learning simulation tools. Else, there's no point in doing it.
And it's something that I can kind of think about is while we kind of pursue engineering, we basically take a look at M2, M3, M1, and basically say, hey, where am I going to apply matrices? Where am I going to apply differential calculus? Where am I going to apply integral calculus? But at the end of the day, for a good mechanical engineer, if you want to be in any domain like FEA, CFD, design, or multibot dynamics, electric vehicles, or whatever, right? I think both of these things, kind of what we think is not necessary, is what basically builds big careers. Is that kind of a right statement to make?
I think it's a right statement, and the scope is actually much wider. So a few days back, this is when COVID initially kickstarted in India and lockdowns began. Um, we did a simulation for how disease spreads using particles. So we what we did is we used momentum conservation equation. We wrote an equation for it, and we wrote it for an n particle system. Right now, interestingly enough, that particular simulation that we did can be used to predict how disease spreads in a particular region with and without social distancing. You can actually use that same simulation to basically perform computational fluid dynamics, Surya. So if you imagine that there are hundreds and thousands of those small particles, right? It's going to have a fine enough density that it's going to behave like fluid flow. And interestingly, when it is, and you have to model gravity as well, and you can make it a bit more rigid, and you can even with the same code you can kind of build a very simple structural analysis code which will also capture fracture, which will capture stresses, non-linearity, and you can make the same solver into a solid body dynamics code to essentially do applications like robotics.
Yeah.
So because at the end of the day, what we did in that particular code was we wrote the differential equation, we created a matrix which essentially represents the system. When I say it represents the system, it represents the characteristics of the system, which in this case is, momentum is conserved. And then we
Mm-hmm.
solve the system. Now, this is what companies call as pre-processing, case setup, and post-processing. In the coronavirus example that we did, pre-processing was setting up the particles. Setting up the case was implementing the governing equations, which was just momentum balance. And finally, post-processing is the final visualization that we all look at and we all think it's cool. But the work that goes behind, it's the same as what happens in ANSYS Workbench, Converge, and whatnot. The only thing is, Converge and ANSYS, they have guys that are 20 times, 30 times smarter than me. So they know what they are doing and they do things very, very efficiently, right? But at the end of the day, you learn the background of it, the applications that you can actually get out of being able to solve differential equations is just countless.
I just was looking at if I could basically find this. Can you see my video,
Uh,
Sarang?
yeah, so this is exactly what I'm talking about. So if you just play this, so you can see that these particles are all collapsing, right? Uh, in statistical thermodynamics, there's a concept called as kinetic theory, where if you assume that these are all gas molecules, Surya, the
Uh-huh.
speed at which these gas molecules move, or in other words, the kinetic energy of these gas molecules, if you assume that those were gases, would represent its temperature. And you can see that those molecules are all banging on the walls, right, on the left side, top side, and bottom side.
Uh-huh.
The speed at which they do and the amount of force that they impart on those walls is essentially the static pressure, right? So in this case, I've basically used the same problem to model disease spread. Now, here's the thing: it's not an accurate model, but you can actually see that with and without social distancing, the rate at which the disease spreads, right? So the graph on the right hand side, it's fairly accurate. Here you can see that with just uh, I'm just making the velocity of the particles zero. I'm randomly selecting a few particles and I'm making the velocity zero, which makes it look like social distancing, right? And then because of that, fewer particles are infected. And I've also modeled a decay. And this is where knowledge of math helps. You will see that any infected particle slowly turns into a light bluish color. That's because I have modeled an exponential decay. So after about 100 iterations, you can see that the infected particles are slowly turning cyan, which is essentially the guy who was recovered from coronavirus. And you can see this graph looks very, very similar to states that have done social distancing very well. And the previous graph that you showed is representative of states where people are not following social distance norms. So even though the numbers, the y-axis numbers might be wrong, the trend is very similar. And remember, these are not people, these are just particles that just obey momentum conservation. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, this is crazy, right? Like the applications of math and uh, computing kind of is enormous, and if we are able to kind of learn that, that's kind of really good. And I think the fundamentals at which Skilling is built is basically to provide these kind of things, right? So great. So I kind of am done with most of my questions. I'm going to take questions from our users. So, Saurabh Gaikwad, before starting MHEV, what basic skill set one must be ready to make a career in it as its emerging field to work in?
Okay, that's a good point, Saurabh. So, as for those of you who do not know, MHEV stands for Master's Certification in Hybrid Electric Vehicles. So, this is a program that SkillLink offers for students who are interested in learning, for mechanical engineering students who are interested in learning and getting into a field with respect to electric vehicles. Now, remember, this is a vast program, and the idea here is to first learn the fundamentals of hybrid electric vehicles and then pick up a specialization program or pick up an elective. So from a fundamentals point of view, you really don't have to know anything. We have some very basic requirement like it is ideal if your CGPA is greater than 60 because companies demand for it. It is easy for you to get a job if your GPA is above 60. Okay, and then you need to have decent communication, and more importantly, you need to be able to put in the time and effort to learn this. See, the one thing that we have seen in the past is some students think they underestimate the amount of effort that is required because these programs are very intensive, right? They're very intensive because they add a lot of value to you, but you are going to realize the value only if you put in the effort. If you do not put in the effort, then what's going to happen is you will not gain a lot of skills. So I hope, Saurabh, that I answered the question.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So I'm going to kind of have a few questions. Ulas Vinod Kumar basically asked, "Can I get a CFD related job without doing a master's only by learning from Skilling?"
See, this is one of those questions that we have helped students get jobs with their bachelor's degree in decent companies. In fact, I think the last person who got into L&T was a bachelor's guy. But the signals from companies are very, very inconsistent, guys. So one thing you need to understand is, when we are trying to partner with companies, the reason why they hire skilling students is not because they have a prior working relationship with us. It's very simple. They find value in the resumes that we provide. And typically we have to go through the HR department, and usually we encounter a lot of folks that are not technical. They're really good at their job, but they're not technical. So they feel very, very, it's very hard for them to override some fundamental rules that their organizations might have, which might not make sense. One such rule is requiring an MTech degree. Now, if you take majority of the computational fluid dynamics job, from a technical point of view, the majority of the jobs available in India do not require that many technical skills, but they still require an MTech degree because majority of the times computational fluid dynamics is not taken by any student. And then if you ask me what about MTech degree, here's the interesting part. In MTech, people don't take more than 2 courses. A skilling student, in contrary, takes at least 6 courses. So it really doesn't matter if they're a bachelor student or a master student, right? But the problem is, since these companies have a rigid requirement sometimes, and that might not make sense, they might not, they might just overlook your profile if you just have a bachelor's degree. Our expectation is that,
And
sorry?
that is only for like very few companies that we know of. Right now, what we are seeing is even companies like Alten basically take up bachelor's students with a engineering bachelor's in engineering with really good CFD expertise. Like when we say CFD expertise, say for example, he knows a really good math, knows the coding skills, has worked on like multiple projects, at least like 10 to 12 projects, has worked on different simulation tools where he has applied the theoretical skills that he has learned, and all these. So if you want to overcome uh, the company that basically asks an MTech degree, you need to showcase that you basically know what an MTech student knows, and even more than that. And a skilling CFD masters or a masters in hybrid electric vehicle definitely allows you to do that. Um, Sarang, sorry to cut you out there. If you have
Not
any,
an issue. So, I'm also getting a few questions here. I'll just,
there are like multiple questions that are coming
right.
in.
So, one question, I think this is a very interesting question from Parth. So, Parth is interested in helping us and is interested in understanding how we developed the MHEV program, right? And essentially, because it's a new field, right? That's a great point. See, it's very simple, guys. The way we develop courses at Skilling is, at the end of the day, it's no secret. We do one thing, and we do one thing very well. We identify the right person to teach it. If see, I have a little bit of background on CFD, and that's why I do CFD courses. I really do a lot of programming as well, and that's why I do basic programming level courses in at Skilling. But if I'm going to come and teach you guys how to design a hybrid electric powertrain, I'm essentially not providing value to you, and I'm replicating the Indian engineering system over again, right? And we truly believe that that's not the case. Though I have a decent bit of knowledge in those areas, we always rely upon experts. So we do a lot of private consulting where we talk to a lot of guys with 15, 20 years of experience in automotive industry because they see what's going on. Now these guys are not going to come and teach you, right? Because they are really high up in the management. And to be honest, they are not technical, right? They are now mostly managing the upper management activities. But you know what? They're great in helping us understand how the future is going to be for the next few years. And that is how we are able to create frameworks for our content, and that's how we developed pretty much any program, CAE masters, MHEV, the electrical masters program as well. In fact, one of the questions that we used to get is, hey, why do we have basic content for electric vehicles in MHEV? The answer is very simple. Given the current job scenario in India, if you look at an electric vehicle, there are some specific components like inverters, DC-DC converters, electric motors. They have separate functions, right? I won't go into details of those functions. But when it comes to electric vehicle design, a mechanical engineer has to know what a DC-DC converter is, and he should be able to understand what is the heat load that is getting generated from these converters. He needs to understand the shape and size and volume occupied by these DC-DC converters for making sure that wiring harnesses are routed appropriately and packaging considerations are taken into account. A mechanical engineer is not going to be designing DC-DC converters. And this is one of the common misconceptions that a lot of students get. They feel like they have to be able to design these core electrical equipments. And as of today in India, the scope of designing these converters and these EV components lies in the hand of electrical and electronics engineers, right? So that's how what we do is we make sure that we get this knowledge from tech experts. And again, you have to make sure that you talk to the tech experts locally because they help you understand the Indian automotive landscape. And most of you are from India, correct? And that's how any course that is designed in SkillLink is designed. It's done with people, with multiple people, with 15, 20 years, sometimes even more, even higher amount of experience. We spend a lot of money in developing these courses because at the end of the day, that's the core problem, right? Your colleges are not providing that value because they are not putting the money for curriculum development and having better faculty. They spend it somewhere else.
And one of the reasons, so I did see someone saying, hey, the course fee is a little high, right? The course fee is a little high because we do all these stuff, right? And there is so much money that we spend in order to develop a coursework because we want to make sure we do not build another normal engineering college, right? We want to provide the skills that will essentially, if you basically take a look into the coursework, work on the assignments, develop a portfolio, you will definitely get a job, right? So those are the kind of skills that we want to kind of provide, and we have seen people do that, right? So yeah, I did have one question. So Nishant, sir, I plan to pursue my master's in aerospace engineering abroad. How will CFD help me in getting admissions in foreign universities? Nishant, it's very simple. So anyone who wants to apply for a master's in US, Europe, or Canada, what they need is a good resume, a good statement of purpose, and a good letter of recommendation. You basically, your resume and your friend's resume will pretty much look the same except your GPA because the software tools or the projects are just one, right? So taking a skill in coursework allows you to work on multiple projects that we basically showed, and in the aerodynamics domain as well. So you basically have a very good resume. So out of the three, you basically have one covered. Then your statement of purpose. Statement of purpose is where you basically say what you have done to learn about safety or aerodynamics and what you want to do next in your career and how a master's degree will help you out, right? And in that, what you have done is really important to showcase your affinity towards that particular domain. And your resume, your statement of purpose will be really good. And for students who do really well, we also kind of help with a letter of recommendation. For people who take up a master's, we kind of help them with choosing the universities, recommending how to kind of apply for funding, what are the funding opportunities available, and all those aspects of it as well. So that's how we basically help. Um, what else?
Okay. So
Go
I'm
ahead, go
going
ahead.
to answer a few more questions. From zero knowledge to CFD to become at least an intermediate, how long is it required? See, to be able to do reasonably well in computational fluid dynamics, Pradeep, it's going to take you at least 6 months to get the required skills. So this is point number one. The point number two is with respect to the skill sets. There was one other comment where someone had said, "Hey, automation is going to rule over, and then CFD is no longer going to be there." Um, so you need to understand that that statement is true for pre-processing applications. So if you're primarily learning computational meshing, right, just focusing on learning meshing is alone not a good idea. It's great to get an entry level job. And with respect to automation completely running the entire CFD pipeline, I strongly believe that we are at least 7 to 8 years away from that happening, guys.
And even in
So
that case, right? Even in that case of automation ruling the world, right? Let's assume software, so all the companies will become a software company, right? Even in that case, the person who basically writes automation at the end of the day needs to know about CFD. Like a computer science engineer cannot come and say, "Hey, okay, this is what we need to automate," right? Obviously, a CFD engineer who needs. So this is where you need to think about blanket statements like that does not make sense, right? Automation, obviously, who's going to automate things, right? You need to automate something. If you need to automate something, you need to have in-depth knowledge on that, right? So uh, if you are building a CFD profile, what happens is the people who automate those profiles also become a CFD engineers, right? Yes, machine learning and AI might come in and do things, but you will be the guys who basically implement machine learning for CFD.
and
So
Surya, just to kind of add to that point, right? See, that is why what we always enforce is whenever you're taking up CFD, you always start with the coding part. Because in the case where automation comes into play, you will suddenly require all mechanical engineers to be able to code very well. And a lot of people, yes, will struggle, but if you have actually finished the coding part correctly, then yes, this is going to be very helpful. And I see a comment from one student that he has taken the course on ANSYS Fluent, but didn't go through the basic CFD course. Well, the answer is very simple, guys. So if that's the case, I would strongly encourage you to go through that course and get the coding experience so that your knowledge is kind of full. You can code and you can also use an application. I'll just quickly scroll to see if there are any additional questions that I can answer.
okay, I had one question, sir. If we search for CFD resources, we find some software tools through which simulations done, and we can also find some kind of courses which full of mathematic equation like NPTEL courses on CFD. Is that necessary to learn those mathematics behind CFD along with the software tools? I think this is a very early question when we started, but Pawan Kumar. Uh, kind of Sarang, do you want to answer that question in short?
Oh, learning from NPTEL, right?
Which full so NPTEL courses have full of mathematical equations on CFD. Is that necessary to learn all the mathematics behind CFD along with the software tools?
See, that is where you always need to learn. See, it's going to be very hard unless you're studying for your 12th standard, which I hope none of you are. It's going to be very hard for you to remember that much level of content for a long term. So what's going to happen is you will see that there are a lot of students that actually struggle with this and they feel really afraid that they have to remember everything, and at the end of the day they don't even start. You need to understand that you need to understand the math and you need to just remember where to find it in case you need it in the future. I'll give you an example. If you want to use divergence theorem, you have to understand that it's a technique that lets you convert volume based quantities or volume integrals into surface integrals. Now, you have to, when I say understand it, you have to realize the use of this particular concept. And then at the end of the day, if there is a need for you to apply this, say that you're discretizing an equation using FEM technique, you can then apply Gauss divergence theorem by just looking up how the integral has to be done. It's perfectly fine if you do not know integration by parts. Say that you forgot integration by parts, which by the way is, the form that we say uv minus integral v du, right? If you don't remember that, it's perfectly fine. You can just refer a book, understand how the derivation is done, go ahead and apply it for the problem. There's no point in learning it completely. There's no point in learning it completely and memorizing it. It's very important to understand it and remember where the reference can be found. I hope that makes sense.
Totally makes sense.
So I have another question. So there is a Anil. I have visited Skilling site that shows 5,000 plus students, and you have, but when it comes to placements, it's just 200 plus. Can you explain why that much variation? So you need to understand, Anil, the placement assistant services that we provide is primarily for our master students, and we don't have that many master students. The majority students are students who are taking individual courses. So more than 4,500 people are taking individual courses from the platform, Anil. I hope that makes sense.
And say, for example, right now, around 1,200 master students are enrolled, and out of those 1,200 students, 280 students have been graduated. Out of these 280 students, I think right now 250 placements have happened, and in addition to that, there's around another 25 to people who went on to do their masters, right? So if you see the number of people who finished the master course, right? That's somewhere around 280 in the last, because we started our master courses in 2019 Jan, right? Our master courses are somewhere around 8 to 12 months long. And people who finished master courses and got a job, we have around 75 to 80 percentage who got a job, and the remaining went on to do their masters. We have only 3 to 4 percentage who are still looking for jobs, right? So that is one thing. So I saw a question from Gokula Krishna. I think he was asking with respect to he wants to do his masters in aerospace and in abroad. Should he basically take up MS in aerospace engineering or MS in mechanical with a concentration on CFD? I think MS in mechanical engineering with a concentration of CFD um, is a safe option, because in countries like US, aerospace engineers are usually recruited by companies like Boeing, and Boeing basically needs you to be a citizen or a permanent resident. So some kind of visa restrictions are there, I think. Sarang?
Oh yeah, please. Can you say that again, Surya?
So aerospace, masters in aerospace or masters in mechanical engineering?
Yeah, see, unless you have a green card, uh, don't go for aerospace because the visa restrictions are fairly high for it. A lot of aerospace companies prohibits international students. Now, this is different if you end up doing a PhD program, because for PhD program, these companies are a bit more relaxed and they hire international students. But
Uh,
for masters, I would not recommend it.
Okay. I had a one question which was asked by multiple people, I think. To join a Skilling CFD Masters program or Skilling any master program, what software should I know before? What theory should I know before? What tools should I know before? All right.
See,
Go ahead.
yeah. So see, if you want to enroll into the master's program, you need to remember that it's going to involve some math, guys. It's going to involve programming, right? Now, if you go to Google reviews of Skilling, you will see that our major plus point is the support that we provide. In other words, if you're ready to put the hard work to learn programming and math, we can help you succeed. But if you are going to be lazy and if you're not going to be writing the software programs, writing the code on your own, then for that matter, none of the programs would work from any training institute, right? You need to be able to put in the effort because uh, these are tough domains, right? There's a lot of knowledge that you need to gather in a shorter amount of time. You need to persist, you need to put a lot of hard work, and only then you will gain something useful out of it.
Guys, there are a lot of questions that have.
So let me, see, guys, if you're asking me questions like which coding language to use, Imanshu, effects of COVID-19, what are CFD companies in India? Abdul, you should just Google search it. Don't waste your time in this particular forum. How is the placement process for CFD masters? That's an awesome question. See, guys, I want to clarify a couple of things. So, one is there was a comment earlier regarding job guaranteed programs. When skilling started out, yes, we had job guarantee programs and we had a lot of success stories. And these are the guys whom you see on our website, on our LinkedIn. These are the people who give us video testimonials. As the company started to grow, it became very difficult for us to guarantee a job to everyone who enrolls in the course. Yes, I know that it would be really nice. And that's why we modified it into a job assistance program, wherein we help you if you're able to put in the effort. The only thing is, when hundreds of people join, it's very hard to guarantee a job, right? And the reason why we are doing this is very simple. Anyone who puts in the effort, when I say puts in effort, completes 3 courses. The master's program consists a minimum of 6 courses, maximum up to 8 or 10 courses. So when you finish 3 courses, you complete 6 to 8 projects. When you finish 8 projects, our career success team is automatically going to work with you to make sure that your resume, project profile, and LinkedIn profile are in top shape. This is just the first step. The second step that you need to understand is you need to put the effort as well. You need to remember that you're not paying skilling to get a job. You are paying skilling to learn, and job is a consequence of the projects that you have done. So if you buy the course and if you did not do the if you buy the pro if you buy the course, if you did not do the project, you are not going to get a job. If you buy the course, you finish the project by taking the required help, you will be in a great position to get a job. And then that's where we refer you to companies. If you buy the course and you do not do the projects, we will not refer you to the companies. As simple as that.
So to kind of summarize what Sarang is saying, the reason that we kind of took job guarantee out is because people started to think, if I pay Skilling 1.5 lakhs, I can get a job. At the end of the day, it does not work like that, right? The reason we can guarantee you a job is because people like Raj Dave, people like Priyatosh, people like Shrey, and there are like multiple people, right? More than 1,000 people who have worked so hard to develop a portfolio. They put in the efforts to build that portfolio. They put in the efforts to learn things, right? If we are going to just say, I'm going to pay you, you are now responsible for my job, right? That kind of mentality will not take anyone anywhere, right? And that's what we are trying to basically take it out, because we want you to learn things, because this is not a short term thing, right? This is not like, okay, after you get a job and my thing ends. It is like, once you kind of get the skill set, it aids you for your life. It sets you up for your lifetime. Like Sarang, to give you an example, Sarang was set up for his life when he finished his masters, right? At that point in time, he was able to take any CFD problem and start working on it, right? And if he did not know that CFD problem, he was able to understand where he needs to go and learn those skills, because he understood the theory behind uh, everything, right? So those kind of skills is kind of, these are called life skills, and that's what we want to inculcate. And yeah, so that's why we kind of make sure we move for placement assistance. And one of the most important things is 80% of the jobs that we have got is after we kind of move from placement guarantee to placement assistance, because we realized people started putting more efforts, right? Great.
As EV is emerging, why you have not introduced battery management in CFD master's program? So Vishnu, that's actually both a good question and a very bad question, right? The reason why I'll tell you that it's a bad question first. This is a type of mentality that people have. When you learn CFD from first principles, you can easily realize that a battery thermal management system is essentially a heat exchanger, and the students who enroll in our course learn how to do heat exchangers. And when they know that, they will automatically be able to set up similar scenarios, which is what happens in a battery thermal management system, right? And it's very important to understand that Learning CFD is not about learning all possible combinations of simulation types. It's always about understanding what equations are being solved in the background. And this is very similar to any subject that you take. It could be electric vehicles, it could be mechanical systems, it could be anything that you want. It's very important to understand what are the equations or what's the math behind the problem and how the math is solved. Once you get an appreciation for it, you can apply the same template, same concept to any area. So if you're able to simulate an heat exchanger, right, you will be able to simulate BTMS. The only thing you need to know is the heat loads, which is very simple.